Hello and welcome to the session on crisis communication management. I'll be sharing 9 habits of highly successful crisis communicators. My name is Regine Leroux. I am the managing director of a company called Reputation Matters, and I look forward to sharing some of the tips and the tricks that we've picked up over the last 15 years for successful crisis communication. So what does a successful crisis communicator have? Let's just take a step back, because for the first time in the digital age, the entire world is faced with the same health pandemic crisis, the same threats, the same fears. It's a crisis of such a magnitude that no textbook could ever have fully prepared any of us for it. But regardless of where you're located or the type of business that you run, the way in which you communicate during a crisis remains the same. So here are 9 habits that we're going to go through that all highly successful crisis communicators have. So what is this? So the first one is to have a plan in place. So in the ideal world, everybody already has a crisis communications plan in place. And what's in that plan? It's who the key stakeholders are that we need to communicate with. How are we going to be communicating, the channels of communication, and what are the key messages? So the ideal when it comes to planning for a crisis is to have a workshop scenario, a setup with all the different key managers, be it the HR director, the IT person, operations. You want as many different people in that workshop session that can flesh out different scenarios and then identify with what the level of the likelihood of it happening is, and the level of risk. And then from there identify, right, if it's a massive risk and it's very highly likely to happen, this is how we're going to communicate, this is who we need to communicate to, these are the channels we're going to be using, and these are the key messages. So there's quite a bit of work that needs to go into such a plan, but it really helps to have that flow of communication. If there's something that's low risk but going to have a massive reputational impact, then obviously that's also something to consider and plan for. If it's got a low likelihood of happening, a low impact on your reputation, it's going to take some a different way that you're going to be communicating around that. So having that plan in place will help you the minute that there's a crisis. Everyone should know who needs to communicate what to whom. And depending on the nature of the communication, it may help to have a flow chart printed out, even perhaps at the telephone. It should be clear how to communicate with key stakeholders, and at minimum to include how you're going to be in communicating to employees, customers, shareholders, and the media. Obviously, each company is going to have different types of stakeholders that needs to be communicated with, but it is so important. You don't want your employees to hear about a crisis on the radio. So it's so important to make sure how you're going to be communicating, as I've mentioned, employees, customers, shareholders, and the media. And a swift, coordinated response is absolutely key during any crisis scenario. Linking it to the current pandemic, nobody anticipated the extent of it. It's difficult to know exactly how to prepare for something like this, but every business should at minimum be prepared for a worst case scenario where their offices may need to be shut down for a period of time and the event of an emergency. The next habit to have in place is to have a spokesperson. Who is your key person that is going to be dealing with the media? This person should ideally be the leader of the organization, the managing director, the chief executive officer. Many organizations do have a designated spokesperson in place. But in the time of a major catastrophe and a major crisis scenario, people want to hear from the top of the organization, from the leader. The last thing you want to do as well is that someone in the organization who doesn't have all the facts communicate their version of the story to the media or to any stakeholder. That is just such a massive reputational risk. So don't open yourself up for that. Make sure that your spokespeople or spokesperson is media trained and is the first port of call, that everybody knows if there's a call that comes through to the journalist, that journalist is pointed directly to the spokesperson. With that said, sometimes you may also need to supplement the leader's communication with the relevant expert in the company to speak on a specific topic. So let's say the crisis is related more specifically to a labor issue, then it would make sense that the human resources director is best positioned to address the media and to ask very specific questions. Same from an operations point of view. So for this reason, that is why it is so important and critical that all the key directors in the company have proper face-to-face practical media training. Being thrust in front of a live camera is incredibly intimidating. Having training will provide the leader, the spokespeople, with a skill set and knowledge to take control of the interview situation. It also will help them to understand this is how print media works, this is how broadcast media works. When it comes to radio and television, how best to handle each different scenario. So whoever is responsible for communicating the messages, make sure that the entire team knows exactly what is going on and which messages are being communicated to the external stakeholders. So it's very important to determine that beforehand. Tip number 3 is compassion and showing empathy. So a really, really key habit and skill for a crisis communicator is the importance of compassion and showing empathy. In any crisis, empathy is so incredibly important. Whenever there is a crisis, people are impacted. And we need to remember that we are dealing with human beings who are coping with this scenario and with this challenge in their own different way. We're all emotional beings, we're all human beings, so we do need to remember that. So be sure to acknowledge and highlight that in any communication. It's so important to show sensitivity and humanity at this incredibly important time. I mean, I think we've all seen that example of the BP oil spill disaster and the CEO conducting an interview saying that he just wants his life back. So none of us want to have that case study around their organization. So there has to be that first sentence acknowledging the situation, the human impact, be it we are very sorry about the situation. Our thoughts are with those that have been impacted, and then to go into the rest of the story. Habit number 4 is to have a quick turnaround time. So speed of response is incredibly, incredibly important, especially in such an uncertain time where everybody just wants some answers. It's very, very important to have a very quick response rate to the situation. So communication is absolutely key. Determine what the key messages are during the crisis, and that's also linking it back to step number 1. When you've planned for a crisis, you have some idea of what needs to be communicated. What's that line of authority? So when you do plan, you know exactly what needs to be communicated. And it's very, very important, especially during the communication part of it, that there is no such thing as a no comment. People will make up their own comments. If you say no comment, they will make up their own comment. And you don't want to leave that gap, because that's a massive, massive risk for your reputation, for the organization. If you say no comment, people will make up a comment on your behalf in their minds. There's also no such thing as an off the record. You can just imagine a journalist is inundated with daily information and press releases and phone calls. And if you're going to say to them, off the record, this is the situation. It's just not realistic to expect that journalist to remember a week, 2 weeks, a month down the line whether it was off the record, if it wasn't off the record, just because of the absolute huge amount of information that they need to deal with each day. So if you don't want it in the public domain, don't communicate it. Never, ever lie. I mean, there's so many examples of people lying and denying it, and then it comes out. You will be caught out. So just tell the truth, even if it's not the greatest, if it's going to put you in a bad light. People are more likely to forgive you than if you continuously denying denying something. So the longer you lie, the worse it's going to be for you in the long run. If the matter is of such a nature that you can't communicate about it because of legal issues, then at minimum, say that the matter is being investigated. It is so important just to give as much information as you legally and possibly can. So instead of saying no comment, just let the media, let the audience know that this matter is being investigated, and more information will be shared as soon as there's clarity. But then make sure that you do give that feedback, but rather say something, let people know what is happening than just saying no comment or off the record. So as soon as there is clarification, it is very important to make sure that you do share more information with all the various stakeholders. So with this specific pandemic and crisis that we're going through at the moment, a couple of things to remember. Respect. Adhering to government decisions and guidelines. You might not be aware of it, and something to note is that all South African companies have been requested to update their websites with the following link to help share the correct coronavirus information and messaging. So if it's not on your websites yet, South African companies, please do make sure that you are asking your IT teams to upload it, just so that we can heed the President's request for how we can all contribute to getting the information out there. Communicate about the office hours. Will the business be open? Will it be closed? Is the team available? Will they be working in virtual offices, working remotely? And then contact information. If anyone has questions, who can they contact? Is the office still, will people still be available in your office during this period of time? And then also the health advice is to bring in the message of the social or physical distancing, washing of hands, sanitizing the message, just so that we can all contribute to helping to share the correct messages throughout this period of time. Then the fifth tip or the fifth habit is to keep stakeholders updated. And the South African government's response to this COVID-19 has been the prime example of how it should be done. I'm incredibly proud of how we as a nation and how our presidency is leading the this whole situation and keeping the public updated and up to date with the situation. There's regular communication directly from the president. It ensures that the public feels safe, and also that we can trust the information because it comes from the top of the leadership in our country. So it's communicated from the most reliable source possible. And because of the government's consistent and proactive communication, South Africans, I do believe, are contributing to being committed to flattening the coronavirus. Obviously, communication needs to continue. There's so many stakeholders and people that need to receive this message. Perhaps not everybody's seeing the seriousness of it, but I do think just in terms of keeping everybody updated, communicating the seriousness of this, they're doing a really great job on that. The sixth one is stick to your guns. The message needs to be clear and consistent. This is what you need to do. This is what needs to happen. These are the parameters. If you don't stick to it, these are the consequences. So to be very clear in terms of what will happen if rules aren't being met. So sticking to your guns in that effect. Consistency is key. If you say something, stick to it. So for the most part of the specific pandemic, the messaging has been consistent. Okay, we'll admit to the fact that there has been a little bit of a wobble in terms of the consistency regarding cycling and running and taking dogs for a walk. But for the most part, the communication has been very consistent in terms of what the consequences are, what needs to happen. The next habit is to keep it simple. And I think we've all just seen the amount of newsletters and correspondence that we're receiving, which in this instance is good because we need to get that message out there. But I do think a lot of the messaging is being lost just because the communication is so incredibly long. So it's see how you can shorten the messages, keep it short and sweet, cut through the noise, share the most important part in the first paragraph, then have a link to the website or have a call center where people who want more information can turn to. Otherwise, I don't know about you, but I personally find that I zone out if there's just too much information to try and read through. So see how you can keep things short and sweet. Habit number 8 is to take action. Be seen to be doing something about it. So practice what you preach. It does not help saying one thing and then doing something totally different. So for example, have you also noticed how many press conferences are currently taking place where the media are invited into a room and the key message is about social or physical distancing? Yet there they are being called in. So leaders need to walk the talk and set the example. It may also be tricky to balance the need for profitability with the need to provide employees with safety and a stable income. However, the businesses who are committed to their employees' well-being, as they say they are, so if they are committed to their employees' well-being, as they say they are, they need to demonstrate it in these times to come. So taking action is very, very important. And then tip number 9, the last one, is fact check absolutely everything. Before sharing any information of communication, be it a press release, a social media post, I'm sure we've all been inundated by all the WhatsApp messages. Check the sources of information. Reliable sources include registered government websites, a recognized research and educational institution. WhatsApp, social media is not reliable. There is a lot of fake news doing the rounds. It's spreading panic. And actually, I don't know whether you know this, but distributing fake news is now a criminal offense. And you may be liable for a fine or imprisonment if you are found to be sharing fake news. So make sure that you absolutely fact check everything. So just to summarize, the first habit, have a plan in place. Number 2, know who your spokesperson is, have a clear spokesperson. Number 3, show empathy. Number 4, be responsive. Number 5, keep your stakeholders up to date. Number 6, stick to your guns. Number 7, keep it simple. Number 8, take action. And number 9, fact check absolutely everything. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. Just pop us an email. You can email us at research@reputationmatters.co.za. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. And yeah, we would love to hear from you. So thank you for your time. All the best with the lockdown and take care and keep safe.